After years of promising tax relief to the American people, Republicans have finally delivered. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which President Donald Trump will soon sign into law, lowers tax rates for individuals and couples, cuts taxes for businesses, and provides significant aid to lower and middle-income families. This legislation represents the largest tax cut in modern history, and as such, has received a lot of criticism, some fair, some very unfair. Number 1, it's not focused on helping the rich. Perhaps the greatest distortion of the legislation is that it's only going to help wealthier Americans. Many of the bill's critics say that because most of the biggest cuts are for corporations and small businesses, it will end up fattening the pockets of rich people and eventually resulting in spending cuts for government programs used by the poor. Number 2, the legislation is focused on lower and middle-income families. Even left-leaning think tanks acknowledge that more than 80% of filers will receive a tax cut under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, but some will benefit a lot more than others. If you're a lower or middle-income earner with children, you're very likely to be among those who will benefit the most. Number 3, the tax cuts will increase the debt, but not by as much as you think. Many in the mainstream media and in the Democratic Party continue to claim the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act will cost close to $1.5 trillion over a decade. This figure is almost certainly wildly incorrect. The $1.5 trillion number assumes there will be no additional economic growth created by the tax cuts and that the Republican-led Congress won't cut other spending programs. Number 4, the bill does very little to simplify the tax code. One of the biggest selling points of tax reform has been that the tax code is far too complex and needs to be simplified. Republicans have long promised to create a new, flatter, simpler tax code, and in the early stages of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, it appeared things were moving in the right direction. Number 5, the bill isn't perfect, but you shouldn't blame conservative Republicans. Despite its many benefits, the tax reform legislation is far from perfect. Many of its key cuts, other than the business cuts, will expire over the next decade. Further, a fair tax system, which would have replaced income taxes with a sales tax system, or a flat tax model would have been much better and more in line with conservative libertarian thought.